What's going on, everyone? Mitch here, and welcome to episode 1 of what I hope becomes a series of videos called Weapon Wars. Now, if you take a quick look at my channel, you can tell very fast that I'm passionate about video games. But something you may not know is that I'm very passionate about military history and military weapons. So I wanted to bring my passion for those two topics, video games and military weapons, into a video series. That's how I came up with Weapon Wars. What I want Weapon Wars to become is a video game weapon comparison show. Now, this is just a pilot or test episode, so your feedback is absolutely crucial to the development of this series. Now, what we're going to look at is historical accuracy, the sound, model and texture, accessibility, and accuracy of these weapons. These categories will be graded on a 5-point scale, and every point is represented by one bullet hole, of course. Now keep in mind, this does not mean your favorite video game or favorite video game weapon is any better or worse. This is all my opinion, and it's for entertainment purposes only. Being the very first episode, I wanted to pick a weapon that was relevant to today. Okay, maybe not relevant to today's firearms exactly, but very relevant to today's video games. The weapon I decided to choose is the Maschinenpistole model 1918, or in short, the MP18, Roman numeral 1. This weapon is featured prominently in 2 World War I video games. Those 2 games, of course, are Battlefield 1 and Verdun. Now to start, let's go over the quick history of the MP18. The MP18 was developed at the request of the German army due to the clear need for a weapon suited to World War I's trench warfare. It was designed by Hugo Schmeisser, and often stamped on the weapon was the manufacturer Theodor Bergmann. The MP18 also gets the distinction of being the first practical submachine gun ever to be used in combat. It's hard to say exactly what the impact of the MP18 was. As far as World War I is concerned, the MP18 came onto the scene a little too late to have a drastic effect on the war. But if you trace the MP18's lineage, there's a case to be made that it's inspired some very iconic weapons. The MP18 was a base for the MP28 and for the Sten gun. Hugo Schmeisser, the developer of the MP18, would also go on to design the STG-44, which many would say is just a crude version of an AK-47. Now let's go ahead and look at the MP18's video game companions. First, we'll be looking at the grizzled veteran of the World War I first-person shooter genre, Verdun. Verdun, which released in April 2015 by developers Blackmill Games and M2H, is widely touted as a hardcore, merciless World War I first-person shooter experience, and is beloved by hardcore shooter fans, such as myself. Now remember, we are looking at how these weapons are represented in their games and rating them in that world. At the end of this, we'll see how identical these weapons in the video games are compared to the real-life counterpart. The MP18 was designed to be a specialized trench warfare weapon, and Verdun nailed that aspect of it. The weapon rains out 9mm bullets, which by today's standards is easily stopped by modern body armors, but in this time where body armor was relatively rare and kind of creative looking, it was a devastating weapon. Because this weapon was meant for the trenches, its range is only slightly better than a shotgun, and while not impossible to land a hit on a target outside the trench, you'll spend a lot of ammunition and make yourself a really easy target, begging to be picked off. So for this reason alone, I have to give the Maschinenpistole 18 2.5 bullet holes out of 5 for accuracy. Now, you'll never be able to see how accurate, or in Verdun's case, inaccurate, the MP18 is if you can't spawn with it. So that's why we look at accessibility. Now, because anyone can pick up any weapon they want in Verdun's attrition mode, including the MP18 Roman numeral 1, we'll go ahead and give Verdun's MP18 a half a point for accessibility. We are mostly going to be talking about the weapon's accessibility in Verdun's frontline mode, which is played at riding 10 times to 1 over the attrition mode. A theme that you might realize pretty quickly with Verdun is that they nail the historical notes, and the accessibility of the MP18 with Verdun reflects that. Like I said at the start, the MP18 was designed for trench warfare in mind. And such a specialized weapon would have to go to a specialized soldier, the Stormtrooper or Stormtrooper. Now, a quick background about Verdun to help explain this accessibility in Verdun. In Verdun, you have to pick a squad, and then you pick a role within that squad. There are 12 squads in Verdun, and out of those 12, one happens to be a Stormtrooper squad. Only one soldier within that squad, though, gets the MP18, and I'm sure you would love to hear me try to pronounce some more German words, but I'll just go with the translated version, the weapon specialist. So unless you create this squad, there's nothing to guarantee there will be a Stormtrooper squad available in your game, and if there is one, there's nothing to guarantee that you can get the weapon specialist role. So it can be a struggle to get your hands on the MP18 in Verdun, and although not impossible, and that's why I took attrition mode into consideration, I can only give the MP18 in Verdun 2.5 bullet holes out of 5 for its accessibility. I probably don't have to tell you this again, but Verdun really nailed the historical accuracies of this game, and with that they nailed the model of the MP18 compared to its real life counterpart. If you even just look at the side of the weapon, they had the manufacturer's name stamped right there, Theodore Borgman. Unfortunately, Verdun's MP18 does get let down by the game engine though. Unity, which this game is built off, is a great engine for indie game developers. And I'm no indie developer or developer at all, but from my understanding the Unity engine is great and pretty relatively easy to use, and it works great with a lot of different hardware. And while M2H and Blackmail games have done a great job of making the game pretty where they can, Unity engine is just not that pretty compared to other modern day engines. Textures accurately of course represent what the weapon is supposed to look like, but you know, they fall flat and dull compared to other shooter games. And I know it's a weapon of war and it's not supposed to look pretty, but yeah, I really wish I could see the weapon and all its ugliness and finer detail. And because of this, unfortunately I have to give the Verdun's MP18 a 3.5 out of 5. And with the model and textures being so accurate, that's not so much me rating the MP18 badly as it's me rating Verdun's engine badly. Now remember, everything can be subjective here, and I don't think anything is more subjective than judging the sound. And once again, I think Verdun is maybe let down by its game engine. I'm no developer, like I said, but I feel like there might be something with what the tools are working with. The MP18 of Verdun compared to other weapons in Verdun sounds accurate. It sounds like an underpowered submachine gun that's firing pistol ammo. I mean, the real issue I have with the sound, and like I said, this gets very subjective, it sounds like it's firing in a tin can. And just like with model and textures, this is an MP18 problem, this is a Verdun problem. Everything kind of sounds like it's a tin can. So once again, while I have to give it for Blackmail and M2H for hitting the historical accurate point that the MP18 was underpowered and should sound like it's shooting pistol rounds, I have to fault them for their subdued tin can sounds found throughout their game. So I'm going to give Verdun's MP18 a 2.5 out of 5 for sound. Now on to historical accuracy, the final category. And I've saved it for last for a very good reason. We're going to quickly go back and look at all the other categories and basically sum up how historically accurate Verdun's version of MP18 was in those categories. If it was accurate in that category, it gets rewarded a point. So looking at the 4 previous categories, that'll give us a total of 4 points out of 5. We're left with 1 point that's kind of a miscellaneous point that, we can just throw it wherever we see fit. So let's look at all the categories really fast here. Verdun accurately depicts a type of combat that the MP18 was intended for. Close range, in the trench, warfare. The MP18 is incredibly inaccurate at range, so for this, Verdun's MP18 gets a point. The MP18 was an expensive late war weapon meant to turn the tide in the trenches and to be wielded by the Imperial German Army's stormtroopers. They were not incredibly common in World War I, and they are not that common in Verdun's game, so Verdun gets a point for accessibility and historical accuracy. Model and textures. Verdun doesn't add any bling or extra attachments to the MP18, and they noticed a lot of the small stuff and put it in there, so that's going to have to be another point for Verdun's MP18. Sound. I went back and forth on this one. It's just so subjective. I do not like how things in Verdun sound at all. Verdun is one of my favorite games, but I cannot stand the sounds. It's probably my least favorite part about Verdun, unfortunately. But with that said, I think they do accurately portray the sound compared to other weapons in this game. It sounds like an underpowered pistol-firing submachine gun. So it's going to have to be a point to Verdun. Overall, I think Verdun nailed the feel of World War I and its weapons, including the MP18. You can always nitpick anything, but I think you would be hard-pressed to find another game that tried so hard to be accurate and got so many things right. So I'm going to have to give Verdun's MP18 a 5 out of 5 for historical accuracy. Now that we got the veteran Verdun out of the way, let's see what the new guy Battlefield 1 can do. Battlefield 1 was released in October 2016 by EA developer DICE. Battlefield 1 was released to critical acclaim almost across the board and features many ways to experience the World War I genre. So unlike Verdun, there are many different variations and looks to Battlefield's rendition of the MP18. So I'm going to have to talk about the weapon in a general sense and citing different setups that are possible with this weapon in this game. Now I won't kill everyone with a background on the MP18 again, but keep in mind the MP18 is supposed to be a trench sweeping weapon. Close range, nothing much else. With that said, the most inaccurate the MP18 in Battlefield 1 can still reach out and get you. It's not rifle accurate, but with the ability to pick your recoil, and since when did that become a thing? Or change this automatic weapon to a 3-round burst weapon. Once again, when the hell did that become a thing? And then just to make sure you hit everything, you put a nonsensical sight on it. Which, when did that become a thing? So with all that said, it still is one of the least accurate weapons in Battlefield 1. But I would have to put the Battlefield 1 MP18 at just above average in accuracy. So that would be a 3 out of 5 in accuracy. Now, as far as accessibility goes, the MP18 is not a rare weapon in Battlefield 1. In fact, the MP18 Trench, which is also the least accurate variant of this group, is the assault starter gun. The only thing that limits the overexposure of the MP18 in Battlefield 1 is probably going to be the community now. For the assault class, people are loving the Hellriegel and the Automatico. So that's basically the only thing that's keeping from everybody running around with MP18s. Is their love for other weapons in the game. But for accessibility's sake, everyone has the chance to use the MP18 in Battlefield 1. So, it has to get a perfect score of 5 out of 5. It's everywhere, if you want it to be. As far as the model and texture go, Verdun in Battlefield 1 couldn't be any more different. Verdun went with a very historical accurate approach, and they only put the things on the weapon that were really on the weapon. Whereas in Battlefield 1, you can throw just about anything you want on that bad boy. And also, very much unlike Verdun, they all look really good on the Battlefield 1 weapon. Now, I may hate the historical inaccuracies of Battlefield 1 and the fact that you can throw a bayonet on an MP18, even though that was never a thing. On a side note, I can see where the developers got the idea to do that because the next iteration developed off the MP18 platform did have the ability to attach a bayonet to it. EA DICE have the fantastic, spectacular looking Frostbite engine. I'm pretty sure you could put a turret in this engine and it would look pretty. Verdun's textures let you know that, hey, this part of the weapon was metal, hey, this part was wood. Battlefield 1, with their Frostbite engine, the metal reflects like metal, the wood looks like wood, it interacts with the environment like wood. And then on top of that, you throw in the environmental textures that pile up on your weapon when you're playing, like rain, mud, things like that. It looks like a gritty World War I weapon, even if it isn't historically accurate. And because it's so beautiful, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. I'm not going to give it a 5 out of 5 because I consider that, hey, I'm looking at this video game weapon and I don't know it's a video game weapon. I'm thinking it might be a picture of a real weapon. Until I see that, I'm not going to give a 5 out of 5 for model and textures, but a 4.5 out of 5. Pretty damn good in my book because this weapon looks fantastic, as do all of Battlefield 1's weapons because they have an awesome engine and they make pretty things. Now on to judging Battlefield 1's sound. Keep in mind and remember that judging sound for the most part is very subjective. And admittedly, I like a lot of other shooters more than Battlefield series, but one thing that I always love from Battlefield games, and they completely delivered again with Battlefield 1, is the sound design. Man, if this game sucked at everything else, which it doesn't suck at everything at all, it would be saved by its awesome sound design. And even with that said, in the fact that I would take Battlefield sound over pretty much everyone else, I don't know if they nailed the MP18 sound. I've listened to a lot of sound files of the MP18, and it's really hard to say. That's why it's so subjective. The sound could sound different because of recording equipment. Where they were recording it at, was it inside, was it outside? Where they had the microphone position, it's very subjective. But just like Verdun, they made this weapon sound underpowered compared to their other weapons in Battlefield. Not underpowered compared to the other assault weapons that are at least submachine guns, because all the other submachine guns in Battlefield 1 fire pistol ammo as well. And even while the MP18 sounds underpowered in Battlefield 1 compared to other firearms in Battlefield 1, the MP18 still sounds like it's a firearm. It still has a thump to it. It has that punch that a firearm has, you know, considering that most bullets travel faster than the speed of sound. So with that said, I'm going to have to give the Battlefield 1's MP18 a 3.5 out of 5 for sound. Now on to Battlefield 1's historical accuracy. I can't help but laugh when I say this because, well, Battlefield 1 is not very historical accurate. It's a decent representation of World War One. I love their campaign. I think it's very emotional and well thought out, and it brings a lot of attention to World War One, which is a very much forgotten war for most people. You know, I mean, most people don't know Veterans Day is Armistice Day in most countries around the world, celebrating the end of hostilities in Western Europe on the 11th month, on the 11th day, at the 11th hour. But with all that attention they're giving to World War One, it still doesn't make up for the fact that they're not very historical accurate. This is by far going to be its worst category. So let's run down the list. Battlefield 1 gets no points for accuracy. Most of the things that made the MP18 accurate in Battlefield 1 are things that never came to the original MP18, like optical sights, recoil selection, and separate fire modes. Battlefield 1 also gets no points for accessibility. The 18 in MP18 refers to 1918. This is an expensive late war weapon that was meant for a specific task and to be wielded by a specific group of people, and the fact that both sides can use this Imperial German Army weapon from the get-go basically means I can't give it points here. And Battlefield 1's beauty does not help its historical accuracy at all as well. Because of the fancy optical sights, because of the fact there was no bayonets on this weapon, because of this I'm going to have to give Battlefield 1 also no points here. I think sound saves Battlefield 1 in historical accuracy. Even though I can't say that Battlefield 1's sound is dead on to what it's actually supposed to sound like, I can't say it's so far off that I can't reward them up a point. Just like Verdun, they made this weapon sound like a low caliber weapon compared to other weapons in Battlefield 1. And man, I do love Battlefield 1's sounds. So, point Battlefield. I try to think of any redeeming features for Battlefield 1's MP18 historically, and I really could not come up with any other to justify giving it another additional miscellaneous point. So it's going to have to be for historical accuracy 1 out of 5 points. So if we go ahead and tally up all the points here, Verdun ends with a 16 out of 25 points. Battlefield 1 barely squeaks by with a 17 out of 25 points. And remember, this was just a fun comparison looking at how two different games, two different developers did the same weapon compared to its real life counterpart. This doesn't mean Battlefield 1's MP18 or Battlefield 1 is any better than Verdun. It does not mean Verdun is any better because it is historically accurate. They're just two different shooter games that both made an MP18. Don't forget, this was my first video, so please let me know what you think. How would you change the rating scale? And more importantly, what weapons would you like to see compared against each other from what games? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. That lets me know that you guys want to see more of this. So until next time, have a great one.